Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has directed all 50 states and 5 large cities to make preparations to distribute a potential coronavirus vaccine as soon as late October. In a letter to the nation's governors, CDC Director Robert Redfield urged states to waive any requirements that would prevent vaccine distribution centers from becoming fully operational by November 1st. That's 2 days before Election Day. The government has hired the private company McKesson Corporation to distribute a vaccine once it's approved. There's growing concern the Trump administration might give emergency approval to a vaccine before clinical tests are completed in an attempt to boost the president's re-election chances. Public health officials have warned rushing an unproven vaccine could pose health dangers and inflame anti-vaccination sentiment. This all comes as the U.S. death toll from COVID-19 approaches 186,000. Meanwhile, COVID-19 cases are surging in the Midwest. More than 260 cases across 9 states have been linked to a recent motorcycle rally in Sturgis, South Dakota. 1 biker has already died. This comes as Iowa now has the highest COVID-19 rate per capita in the country. The number of new cases in Iowa soared by 90% over the past 2 weeks. Meanwhile, Iowa Senator Joni Ernst has become the latest Republican to embrace a conspiracy theory that far fewer people are dying from COVID-19. She also suggested doctors may be misclassifying COVID cases in order to make more money. President Trump's escalating his war on the World Health Organization. The State Department's announced it's redirecting $62 million owed to the WHO this year. In addition, the U.S. is withdrawing government employees who advise the organization. Trump's already announced the U.S. will leave the WHO, but that will not officially happen till next year. This all comes as the WHO is working with over 170 countries to develop a coronavirus vaccine, but the U.S. has refused to join or help fund the global effort. The U.S. has imposed sanctions on the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and another top ICC official. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced the move Wednesday.
In June, the Trump administration authorized the imposition of economic sanctions against foreign persons directly engaged in ICC efforts to investigate U.S. or allied personnel and those who materially assisted in that effort. Today, we take the next step because the ICC continues to target Americans, sadly.
The Trump administration has repeatedly attacked the International Criminal Court for investigating war crimes committed by U.S. troops in Afghanistan, as well as Israeli crimes in the occupied territories. Human rights and legal groups criticize the Trump administration's move. Catherine Gallagher is a lawyer at the Center for Constitutional Rights. She represents victims of both U.S. and Israeli war crimes.
The sanctions announced by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo against Fatou Bensouda, the prosecutor of the ICC, constitutes a frontal attack on the rule of law. This action shows that the Trump administration is happy to stand with dictators and war criminals rather than with victims of war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity.
Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden's heading to Kenosha, Wisconsin today to meet with the family of Jacob Blake. The black man left paralyzed after being shot 7 times in the back at point-blank range by a Kenosha police officer. Trump visited Kenosha Wednesday but never said Jacob Blake's name. He visited on Tuesday. Meanwhile, President Trump campaign's press secretary appeared to justify the recent fatal shooting of 2 protesters in Kenosha by a white 17-year-old Trump-supporting vigilante. Hogan Gidley appeared on CNN.
The problem is so many Democrat governors, so many Democrat mayors have now said, don't do your job, stand down. Let these riots, let these looters continue to criminalize our communities. And the president doesn't want that. He wants them to be able to stand up. But it does make sense, just logically. If you don't allow police to do their job, then the American people have to defend themselves some way.
President Trump's ordered federal officials to find ways to cut billions of dollars in federal funding to Democratic-run cities that have moved to reduce funding for the police. In a memo released Wednesday, Trump said, quote, it's imperative the federal government review the use of federal funds by jurisdictions that permit anarchy, violence, and destruction in American cities. The memo lists several cities, including Portland, Oregon, Washington, D.C., Seattle, and New York. It also directs the Justice Department to compile a list of of what it calls, quote, anarchist jurisdictions. The mayor's office in New York decried Trump's move, saying, quote, this is a racist campaign stunt out of the Oval Office to attack millions of people of color. A warning to our audience, the following three stories contain disturbing images and descriptions of police violence. Shocking new details have emerged about the police killing of a black man named Daniel Prude in Rochester, New York in March. Video released by his family shows Prude died from asphyxiation after officers handcuffed him, put a hood over his head, then pushed his face into the freezing cold ground for 2 minutes while kneeling on his back. Daniel Prude was naked and unarmed. He died 7 days later. The police encounter began when Prude's brother called 911 asking for help because his brother was acting strangely. On Wednesday, 3 Black Lives Matter activists were arrested during a protest. Prude family is calling for the firing of the officers involved in the defunding of the Rochester Police Department. In news from California, a police officer in San Leandro has been charged with felony manslaughter after shooting dead a 33-year-old black man named Stephen Taylor inside a Walmart April 18th. Within a span of 40 seconds, Officer Jason Fletcher entered Walmart, shot Taylor with a taser, and then shot him in the chest with his gun. In a statement, the Alameda County District Attorney stated, quote, Mr. Taylor posed no threat of imminent deadly force or serious bodily injury to defendant Fletcher or anyone else in the store, unquote. Police were first called to the Walmart because Taylor was trying to leave the store with a tent and a bat. His family said he was homeless at the time. The family of a Salvadoran-American teenager shot dead in June has sued the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department over his killing. 18-year-old Andres Guardado died after being shot in the back 5 times. He was working as a security guard in an auto body shop when 2 officers approached him. One of his co-workers says Guardado became scared and started running away after an officer drew a gun. A whistleblower within the sheriff's department says the deputy who shot Guardado was a prospective member of a violent police gang within the department known as the Executioners. The whistleblower, Art Gonzalez, said earlier this summer, quote, members become inked as executioners after executing members of the public or otherwise committing acts of violence in furtherance of the gang, unquote.